card for a parking problem.
Four in your 23.
Yes, that's 4. I'll get a 28 from one truck when you're ready.
Go ahead.
One truck, white Lincoln X-ray 985 should come back up next.
So you had 2000 Patrick Spalding.
10-4. If you can just put a little note in something like that, I might not be leaving a note on his vehicle so that I can go remove it.
Fuck. Fuck. Rockingham 505. 505 enter vandalism case for Athens. Complainant, soon to be ex, slashed her tires and has made threatening comments to her. She's concerned he might return.
Yeah, forgive this at 32.
10-4. You're assigned to a vandalism case in Athens. Did you copy the 505?
Yeah, 4. Look at that.
21.
No, 3 in Depot Street. Truck away entering 5.
That was 435.
10-4.
10-4.
You can go 643 again.
143.
You go with that 43 you had. I didn't hear any, but I had just looks like we do.
10-4. I just wanted to know if you should be put back 76 to Cabana Circle or to the subject's address.
Yeah, I'll be 23 back on that found property case, and I'll be 76 to the Williams Road address to see if I can find the owner.
10-4. 449 1120.
449, 1121, thank you.
10-4.
Code 4. 4.
Alright, we have 535.
Yeah, that was a great college.
535.
Should be. You guys know for a woman who fucked into a house. I'll slide up that way.
Caller is now been able to close the front door. He's now pounding on the door, trying to get in still. No flight floor on their hair, not tie-dye shirt on. And number 21 is on.
We have separation. In or out. She's ready. Mount Everest is the tallest mountain in the world. The Earth is the third planet from the sun. Michael Proctor was fired today. Michael Proctor did not plant evidence in the Karen Reed case. All four of these things are facts. They're facts. I'm not here to defend Michael Proctor's actions. Those are things that are decided by his superiors. But what is he guilty of? He is guilty of making insensitive texts. When I say guilty, this is what they found. I shouldn't say guilty in terms of he was guilty. Implies he was charged with a crime. He was not. He was fired for making very insensitive texts on his private phone. He was disciplined for possibly drinking a couple of beers or something like that at lunch. And I don't know if it was a couple or 100. I really, and I don't think anybody knows, right? When he had been on assignment with his official vehicle. And he was also wrong to have any discussions at all of the Karen Reed case with people that were not part of the investigation. Now, those discussions over texts were limited, didn't reveal any essential parts of the case, but that doesn't excuse it. I'm not here to defend Michael Proctor. I'm just here to say that whatever you think of Michael Proctor, whether you love him, if you're a family member, you know him to be a certain person, or whether he is this mythical image that you've created in your mind, he did not plant evidence in the Karen Reed case. And that's just a fact based on the timeline, period. Now, I can't say that he didn't go 3 weeks later to, for some inexplicable reason, plant the 47th piece, right? I don't know what that would add to the case, but you can't prove something like that because pieces were being discovered and exposed over a period of 3 weeks as snow was melting. But that day, the crucial day, the main taillight pieces were found by the CERT team, first one at 5:45 at night, and the timeline just does not allow for that piece to have been planted. That is the essential reality of this case. It's the reason that I flipped back when I flipped. Nobody convinced me. It wasn't from somebody else. The mighty Kate Peter trying to call me up and brainwash me. No, it was I go through these cases meticulously, and there's probably no mind I would respect more than Kate Peter, but I didn't know her. And but no matter how smart somebody is, I go like you, we make up our own minds, right? And that's how the people are in our chat. They make up their own minds about things, and that's how it should be. They look at the evidence, they listen to my arguments, and they listen to other people's arguments, Roberta's, Kate's, whatever, Turtle's maybe, I don't know. They listen to whatever, and they make up their own minds. That is really the difference between the people you see in chat at my channel and at Kate's channel than what you will see at the Free Karen Reed channels. That's just the reality of it. They toe a party line at those channels. They don't seem to actively think on their own, at least not the ones that are publicly commenting on the case. Now, I'm always going to follow my own mind. And that doesn't mean I'm always right. It just means I'm always going to follow my own mind. You've got to convince me. The evidence, the logic has to convince me. I've changed my mind on things, and I'm willing to change my minds on things. You present me with new evidence or a better argument, and I do listen to people's arguments, and I will absolutely change my mind on a particular piece of evidence or even overall on a case. Now, in this case here, I pretty regularly piss off people on both sides, but I think that's a good sign. That's a sign of someone that is not. Two things. One thing, that's a sign of someone that is not towing some kind of a party line, right? So there is no chance. There is zero chance that the Glare or LTL or Young Jelly are ever going to ask a question of the conspiracy theory. There is zero chance of that. There is zero chance. They toe the party line, and that's it. They're not really there to ask questions or think it through. They're there to promote an agenda because it advances their channel. The fact that I have opinions that will piss everybody, every one of you listening, with everybody, every one of you hearing my voice will at some point disagree with me, probably tonight, probably in the next 5 minutes. But that should be okay. But that tells you that I'm thinking for myself. Nobody tells me what to think. The fact that I'm willing to change my mind, but also the fact that one of the problems with once people choose a side in anything in life, right? Then you get what's called confirmation bias. So let's just say from the anti Karen side, once you make the decision that Karen is guilty, that she did this, and now there's an emotional part of your brain that looks, you watch this case and you get to see what happened to John, his family. You think about his poor nephew and niece, and you think about all the innocent people that have been falsely accused here, and it pisses you off, understandably, right? But so now what you start doing is it creates a bias within you that impacts how you look at every single piece of evidence that comes through. So every single statement that Karen makes in a documentary or on the news, or every look that she makes in court, people that have chosen the anti-Karen side will interpret that through the lens of, say, consciousness of guilt, right? Look at her. She's evil, right? And I really want to encourage people not to do that, but because it leads to mistakes. It's important to try to look at everything objectively, wipe that confirmation. First of all, recognize that confirmation bias is something that exists in all human beings. So me, you, everybody. And the only way, the best way to combat confirmation bias is to recognize it and be aware of it. Be very self-aware. That's a very, very important thing. And look at each piece of evidence in isolation and see what makes sense. Now, another part of that too is I've emphasized here for a long time. YCT rule number 1 is there are no geniuses. But the corollary to that, the adjacent rule, is that there are no idiots. Now, Karen Reed is not an idiot. All right. I mean, that doesn't mean that every decision she made is smart, because nobody always makes smart decisions, and she's made a lot of mistakes and she's made some baffling decisions. But as a starting point of view, if you assume that Karen Reed is an idiot just because you don't like her or because you think she's guilty, that's going to lead you to errors. This is an educated, intelligent woman, and you can see how articulate she is when she talks on the camera. So when she does something that we may find baffling, you have to really try to look from, what was in her mind when she did it. It's a mistake to say, well, who knows, she's an idiot, because she's not an idiot. All right, she's a very intelligent person. So if she says something, it may be a lie, but whatever, it may be the truth. But if she's saying it, and I'm not talking about what she might be saying at the scene of the crime when she's under stress and she's drunk or hungover or whatever. I'm not talking about that. But if she's doing a TV interview or if she's on a documentary or something like that, whatever she's saying, just remember she's an intelligent person that is saying it for a reason. She's not having a moment where she's throwing stuff out there. So if you really want to understand her, try to get to what the reason is. And that's the key to understanding it. Look, this is how it's the same thing if you're looking at a villain, right? If you're looking at a serial killer or something like that. Generally, most of the people that you're going to analyze in these cases, whether they're cops, whether they're the good guys, the bad guys, whether they're victims, whether they're killers, very few of them are going to be geniuses, really. So really none of them. And very few of them are going to be idiots. There occasionally is an idiot, but until Tom CPU commits a crime, I don't know. I'm teasing, Tom. I'm teasing. It's important to put yourself in the shoes of that person and try to think about the way they're thinking about it. So let me come to the very interesting part of the documentary last night that emerged, and Hank Brennan actually mentioned it in court, despite the fact that Hank was apparently very ill. You remember, if you guys were watching this with me, I was saying in chat, boy, he looks ill. And it turns out he does have the flu or something like that. So, despite that, he did manage to point out he obviously had watched the documentary the night before, and he pointed out that Karen now says that she pulled a piece of glass from John's nose. Now, that really baffled me. Like, why? Not that it might have happened or didn't happen. It wasn't the question. The question is, why did she say this? Why did she tell a documentary to this? And remember, this was probably recorded before the trial. What did she want to tell the audience in that moment? And that's the key thing. So I've been kind of wrestling with that for the last 24 hours since that happened. Actually, that was a couple nights ago that she said that, right? So about an hour before I went on court TV last night, I had a possible insight. It happens. Like you smell wood burning and you're like, oh, I had a thought, right? That's how it works. So I called up Kate. Who better to call than Kate, right? And I said, so my idea is this. What if Karen is telling this story about pulling this piece of glass out and then having blood? I think she even used the word gush, which doesn't make sense. It's not like an artery was cut, but still, some kind of bleeding continued after she pulled the glass out. Now, leaving aside the medical plausibility of any of that for the moment, why would she say this? And so my idea, I've been wrestling with it all day. And when I called Kate, I said, could it have been because she wants to tell the audience that this is proof that John's wounds, or that wound at least, was fresh, that it didn't happen 5 hours, so 6:30, so 5 hours earlier. That didn't happen 5 hours earlier. Is that what she was trying to say? And so that was my idea yesterday. I have another idea, which I'm going to run by you in a second. And I think it'll be pretty convincing. But so that was my idea about 7:00 last night. And, Kate thought it was a solid idea. And then I go on the show on Court TV, and who was on but Nurse Kim. And Vinny, knowing that Nurse Kim is a nurse, asked her something along the lines of that, Now, I don't know how Nurse Kim got on the show, and I'm not saying she did a bad show or doesn't belong there. I'm not saying anything negative at all. But how did she get selected to be on there? How is Court TV aware of Nurse Kim? Well, how was Court TV aware of Nick Rocco? They had to have somebody to reach out to. Now, I don't know who this is, but I'm going to guess maybe it's Alan Jackson. Maybe it could even be Karen herself. I don't know. It's got to be someone closely connected to them. And so we know that Nick Rocco drives in the limo with Karen sometimes, sits in court with them all the time. So he's huddled with the lawyers now. This wouldn't have been the case in the first trial. In the first trial, he was going to court, but the relationship has seeming to have grown since then. And so Nick is prepared by Karen and her defense team for those Court TV interviews, those Court TV segments. Was that the case with Kim? And the reason I ask is because Kim seemed to kind of say something similar to what I suggested. She didn't use the word fresh as though the wound being fresh, but she used something similar language. Maybe I'll go back and I have the clip. I don't have it as a clip, but I have the show. I can link to it. Maybe we'll go back and look to it. But she seemed to be going with that same idea that this indicated that that injury happened to John not long before he was discovered. So was Karen, when she said this, trying to suggest that John was... Now, we know they've long wanted to say that John was put out much later. It still doesn't make sense because John did have signs of hypothermia on his organs, and his body temperature was only 81 degrees. Now, we haven't heard any testimony as to how long it would take if you put somebody out unconscious in 18-degree weather. How long would it take them to go into hypothermic state, and how long would it take for their body? Thank you, Arlene. How long would it take for their body to reach 81 degrees from the normal temperature of 97? 98.6 rather. So I don't know the answer to that. I'm going to guess it's probably more than an hour, probably well more than it, but I really don't know. Maybe someone else can get us that information and put it on here. But the key thing again, as I say, is to try to think like Karen thinks. All right. And so and considering that Nurse Kim might have been prepared in the same way that Nick Rocco is prepared by the defense team, that could be what she was trying to say at the time. Countdown says you lose 1 to 2 degrees an hour. So if that's true, and I don't know if it changes based on, obviously clothing affects it, but if you're unconscious, if your heart's not beating, things like that. So the other thing that came to me today was this. And hear me out, because I can back this up. No one can back this up the way I can. All right. So in July of 2023, Karen did an interview with Gretchen Voss, and all three of the lawyers were present. It's recorded. Now, I've known about this for a long time. I've talked about it or hinted at least a little bit on the show, but now we can talk about it because that part of the transcript was read out loud by Hank Brennan in court a couple weeks ago. And I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but Karen describes examining John's taillight in the driveway. Karen examining her taillight in John's driveway. And this would have been when she was with Kerry and Jen. And she describes it very vividly as missing pieces. Yes, missing pieces. For all those people in Free Karen Read land who think it wasn't missing pieces, that it was just cracked, you can't say it anymore because Karen doesn't say that. And we've been telling you that for a long time, but now you've heard it said by Hank Brennan. Now, maybe you still think Hank Brennan somehow misquoted a transcript and the defense didn't point it out because they have the same transcript and the judge didn't point it out. But that's absurd. And the audio is there and you're going to presumably hear it in court. It depends on if Hank chooses to play it. But just to accept it as fact, Karen Read described the taillight missing pieces, wires exposed to the point where she was afraid it might affect the functioning of the Lexus. Now, but there's another part of that story that she said. She said, I plucked out a piece of the taillight, plastic or glass. It's plastic, but she may have called it glass. I'm not sure. And dropped it in the driveway. Now, why did she tell that story? Why would she tell? Well, first of all, it still remains amazing to me that her entire defense team, which last year, Alan Jackson in closing, now keep this in mind too. So in closing, he showed the image of the taillight in the driveway from the Ring video as it's pulling away. And he says, you can see here that this taillight is undamaged. It's perhaps cracked. I don't have the exact quote, but he said something to that effect. He basically said the taillight was cracked, is what he said in the driveway video. Now, notice he didn't say that in the opening arguments, in the opening statements. He could have, but he didn't. And the reason why is because he didn't know. He knew what was in that audio. He was in the room actually when Karen said it, but they knew the audio was in discovery. He couldn't know if Adam Lally would decide to use it. So he had to wait. But Adam Lally chose not to use it for whatever reason. I'm not criticizing it because we don't know what's in the entirety of the audio, but he chose not to use it. We all thought he was going to. For some reason, he didn't. And now, when it comes to closing arguments, now it's too late to introduce it. So now, Alan Jackson is free to bring up that video and say, see, he wouldn't have done that had they played that Voss video. He never would have showed that Ring video at the end because it would have looked foolish. This is something the Free Karen people are slow to catch on to, but is what it is. Anyways, but why did she tell this story? Why did she even try to tell a story about dropping a piece of taillight inside John's driveway? Well, the reason is because the state police a few days later investigated that driveway, and they didn't find anything. They didn't find any damage. They found no damage to the house, the garage, no damage to John's vehicle, and no pieces in the driveway. This is also why Adam Lally, when he was showing videos, Ring videos at different various stages from that driveway, he showed the extensive efforts that were made to clear snow from it, including shoveling it and then first Mike Camerano, who came to pick up John's niece, Kaylee, in the morning. He shoveled it because the garage door wasn't opening, so he shoveled in front of the garage, wasn't closing rather, so he shoveled it in front of the garage door. And then later, Paul was shoveling it after he got back from the hospital. I can only imagine what was on his mind, right? He's just seen his brother. His first siblings already, his sister is already dead, died 8 years before, and now he sees his brother for the last time in the hospital. You can only imagine what was going through his mind, but here he is, maybe trying to think about what he was going to tell the nephew and niece who weren't home yet. So he was out shoveling the driveway. But then we also saw later on and Adam Lally went out of his way to show this to the jury, that somebody came in. When I say somebody, it wasn't some mysterious person. I just don't remember who it was that did it. But somebody came and snowblowed. Very good job. I mean, you could hire them. That whole driveway. They did a great job. But why was Adam Lally trying to point that out? Why would he? It never came to fruition in the trial. But I knew as I was watching it, because he was expecting the defense to possibly bring up that audio and say, where's the missing piece? As an indication that the police were being sloppy. But when you look at how that driveway was snowblown from one end to the other, it's not hard to imagine what would happen to a tiny piece of taillight. We don't know how big it was, but some tiny piece of taillight that Karen plucked out. That probably still exists on Pleasant Street or in the neighbor's lawn, or on the sidewalk on the other side of the fence. That's was never found, but it's not surprising because a snowblower throws snow pretty far. But sorry about this long-winded version of the story. I'll get back to what I was just saying with the theory about the glass found in the nose. So Karen tells this story about dropping a piece of taillight in the driveway, whether it was people can believe that or not, whether she's telling the truth or not. I believe she's probably telling the truth, but there's no way to know. The point is that she's used this glass thing to try to show that the investigation was corrupt or flawed or sloppy. So now let's fast forward to presumably the interview when she tells the story about the glass piece in John's nose. That was probably from April of last year. And isn't she kind of maybe potentially saying the same exact thing? She's going to say, or at the time she was saying, there was a piece of glass that was buried so deeply into John's nose that when I pulled it out, blood flowed. And obviously she didn't keep that piece of glass. She threw it on the ground. And so she's trying to say, where is that bloody piece of glass? They found 9 pieces of glass. Thank you very much, Claire Marie. And thank you, Christy. Thank you, Claire Marie, and I will go to Christy's comment in a moment too. So she's trying to say, I'm guessing, where's the bloody glass piece? Aha. That's missing. I think that's what she was trying to say back then. Now, I'm not saying she's going to continue with that now, and there really is possibly no way for her to. I mean, this is something that's just designed for public discussion anyways, or public influence, because she's not going to take the stand. So the jury's never going to know about this bloody piece of glass. So unless the prosecution chooses to play this clip, I don't know. But I'm just trying to think about why she would tell this story. And there's another, and she has done this before. So in the summer of 2023, she also made the claim. She definitely told Gretchen Voss this. I'm not sure if she made the claim anywhere else. But she made the claim that she was sleeping with John one night when the Ring video alarm system woke them up like around midnight, and somebody was outside. And John went out outside to see what it was, and there was a bunch of teenagers supposedly drinking in the bushes between yards or something like that. And John said, "Hey, get the fuck out of here." And some kid who she said was Colin Albert said, "Fuck you," this and that. And they get into a swearing contest. And then the next day, John found a bunch of beer cans on the lawn or in the trees or something like that. Gretchen had interviewed all the neighbors, and her conclusion was that if the incident happened, there's no evidence that it involved Colin. And the neighbors seem to not think that it did. So she seems to have taken a possibly real thing, kids drinking on the lawn and John waking up, and inserted Colin into it because she's worked hard for a couple of years to try to establish Colin as part of the third party culprit theory. And he's a crucial part of it for them, because if you don't say that evidence was planted, then Karen did it. There's no middle ground there. Karen's taillight pieces were found all around John's body, in the area where John's body was, in a debris field. And so either those pieces were planted there or Karen did it. There's no other middle ground. So why would Michael Proctor or why would any trooper be involved with framing Karen? Why would they be trying to protect whoever was in the house, Brian Albert, whoever? Well, in order to make that link, they tried to connect it to Colin, because the argument at the time was, listen, Colin was just a kid. He was 17 years old at the time, and nobody wants to see his life ruined. So everybody rallied to protect Colin. And that's how you got all the witnesses to lie, and that's how you got the trooper to plant evidence. I know it's a crazy argument. It's a reach, but it's the closest thing that they could pull together where there seemed to be some kind of possible motive for Michael Proctor to commit this grievous crime of becoming part of a murder conspiracy for people that he either didn't know or barely knew. So it was a way of connecting dots in a way that kind of at least was tangible. You could sell that to a screenwriter. Say, all right, let's build a little bit more on there, and maybe this will work, right? So that's why she had to put Colin into that narrative. Now, it still didn't quite really work, because there was no motive for people inside the house to beat up John. And even if someone is to think, well, Colin's a hothead, he's not used to drinking, he's a football player, the idea that John O'Keefe is going to come into the house of a cop that he doesn't know well, but that he works with and has had no history of bad blood with at all. He's there, they're friendly, he's there drinking. The idea that Colin is going to attack him and that his uncle is not going to break it up, no, his uncle's going to help, is crazy. It doesn't make any sense. Of course, I've broken up a lot of fights, and sometimes between friends. There's no question what Brian Albert would do. He's a tough guy. He's been in that situation. I'm sure he's been in that situation himself in bars where he had somebody was getting a little riled up. It almost looked like maybe he did some of that that night at the waterfall. But you grab someone and say, "Hey, cool it." That's what he would have done with Colin if Colin, just because he was drunk, was at the house. Now, we know Colin wasn't at the house. So I'm trying to entertain the theory and try to put ourselves in the mind of the way they were thinking when they were trying to sell this theory to the public. So they knew it didn't make sense. So they had to get more. And I was having these conversations with Sean McDonough almost every day. What I didn't know was he was having conversations with people on that side. So it seems he was taking my questions to them, and then they were developing answers based on that. I don't mean to insert myself into the narrative like, oh, it's all about me. I don't mean it that way, but it's how it feels to me, because I was asking them those questions, and then a few days later he'd come back with an answer from them. I he wasn't telling me where he was getting it. In fact, like I said, at one point, and I told him that the key thing is the taillight, and you have to prove if you get an early image of it, if it shows that it was missing pieces, there's no conspiracy. If it shows that it was only cracked, there's a conspiracy. And then, like magic, a couple of days later, he gets me pictures of the taillight from the Sally Port discovery material. I was like, wow. So in late July of that year, I think it was late July, he gave me a story. And if you're listening, Sean, now, I'm sorry, brother, but you know it's true. That seemed to tie it all together. So part of the story was that he had an active DEA agent that was a friend of his or a contact that told him that there was an ongoing investigation into drug activity within the Canton Police Department. Now, he eventually walked that one back, but maybe a day later. But at the time when he pitched me the whole thing, there was basically two legs of this story that were standing it up. That was one. The other leg was what he told me was that Karen had filmed an individual dealing drugs on a street corner in the neighborhood. And she may have even been asked to, if I remember right, was asked to make that film by John. And John, so she gave the video to John, and John sent it to the Canton police. And what they told me was that the person dealing drugs, they said, was Colin Albert. Now, this was wrong. So please stay with the story quickly. I mean, don't jump away now, because Colin Albert's not a drug dealer and was not in that video. But that's what I was told. And I put that story out. I didn't use his name, but I said the nephew. But the reason this tied it all together, these two things, is on the one hand, you got this drug dealing that's being investigated inside the Canton Police Department. Again, that's false too. There was an investigation into an officer named Gooley who had retired about 10 or 12 years before. I don't know if it was a DEA investigation, but he was someone that was involved with drugs. So there may have been a DEA investigation. I don't know. But beyond that, there's no evidence of any wrongdoing. And it sounds like that person was maybe just someone with a drug problem, not dealing drugs. So, but I don't know the details, and don't need to and don't want to. This was something that happened a long time ago. All right. But the way it was presented, you had this so-called ongoing investigation into dealing that could explain a lot of things, right? That could explain if the now deceased Chief Berkowitz, who in truth, nothing ever improper was ever discovered about this man. But at the time, I didn't know that, right? And Chief, could that explain why the Chief Berkowitz was inserting himself into the case to protect Brian Albert, discovering pieces of taillight on the street 10 days later? Things like it seemed to tie that in a little bit. But the main thing that tied in was, now, if it was true that Colin Albert was a drug dealer, it's not, but if it was true, and that Karen Reed had filmed it, and that John had sent this to the Canton police, that would give, again, this is a fictional scenario. This is not based in reality, but I didn't know any of these people back then. That would create a motive for the Alberts to want to have a talking to with John O'Keefe. And so that would create this scenario where you might want to invite him back to the house and have that talking. Again, it's bad fiction, but it's the attempt to try to tie this together. And now the reality of the situation is there was somebody dealing drugs on the street corner. I have his name. I'm never going to reveal it. The man was 27 years old, not 17, and Karen did film him. And John O'Keefe did send that video to the Canton police. Who did he send it to? He sent it to Kevin Albert, Brian Albert's brother, and Chris Albert's brother. Kevin is a well-regarded detective on the Canton police force. And John O'Keefe was, I don't know if friends or friendly. John O'Keefe was friendly enough with him that he had his cell phone number because he texted it to him. Now, that video is in discovery, and it was in the last trial too. They could have used it. The reason it's in discovery was because it was sent to Kevin Albert, and so all that stuff was put in. So what we see here, though, is Karen falsely inserting Colin into a narrative in order to try to make this alternative theory work. So you actually have a motive there to tie it all together. So is she kind of doing the same thing here, where she's taken something that might have a kernel of truth to it and spinning it into her own tale at the crime scene for her own reason? And so the key is just to figure out what that reason is. So it may be, like I said, to try to imply that John had been put out much more recently and therefore was bleeding, uh, or that to somehow malign the police because they didn't find a piece of glass with blood on it, or that they cleaned that blood off it, which wouldn't even make sense, because if you found a piece of glass with blood on it, the prosecution would be presenting that as evidence, unless it was not cocktail glass, right? If it was, or not matched to the cocktail glass. So if it was some other kind of glass. But I mean, like I said, I've been in the middle of 1,000 fights or more from my bar owning days. And I've had glass bottles thrown at me. I've had seen a lot of broken glass around in the middle of melees. It's dangerous. But I've never seen a piece end up in somebody's face. So it's hard to imagine how John could get attacked in a fight inside the house with a small number of people and end up with a piece of cocktail glass in his nose. It doesn't make sense. And if the wound is fresh, was John lying in the house? What do they believe, that John was in the house unconscious for hours, and then somehow they attacked him again, and a piece of glass ended up in his nose? And also, just even, I'm not a doc, I'm not a medical person, but it doesn't make medical sense to me that you have a piece of glass in your nose, your heart is not beating, and your body temperature is only 81, and it's 18 degrees outside, and you've got snow on your face. You pull this glass out and blood is going to flow? I don't know. Maybe that's possible, but it doesn't seem very likely to me. Now, is there something real to this? There probably is. So my guess is, if you remember, Karen had blood all over her hands. And when she got in the car, the police cruiser a little bit later, to warm up with Ken and Kerry and Jen, she looked at her hands and saw the blood, and she said, "Am I having my period?" So she was confused and having a little bit of a mental breakdown. But that means there was blood on her hands, apparently on her face and in her hair. When they try to do CPR to John, mouth to mouth, he had a lot of blood in his mouth. And I believe he had a tongue laceration. So probably when his head struck the ground, or when the baseball bat hit it, if you prefer, or a bowling ball, whatever you think happened. Thank you, Toy. I appreciate it. We'll get to the comments in a moment. And so there probably was a lot of blood in John's mouth. You saw the blood drops in the snow. That probably came from people doing CPR and getting blood on their hands, and then it drips into the snow, or maybe some of it dripped off when the paramedics moved him. Like I said, even though he wasn't bleeding at that time, there was a lot of blood had been in his mouth and in his nose, perhaps. So did she see the glass on his nose, and she's, in a hysterical state, and she reaches down and pulls the glass, and maybe the blood that ended up on, if blood ended up on his nose or in that area, it was from her hands, from her hand. And then later on, she just can't quite remember it properly, or she's just making the story up, embellishing it to fit her purpose. But the real thing is to try to understand what actually is the purpose that she's trying to do. All right. So today we had the witness list. Let's pull the witness list, the defense witness list. Oh, all right. Let me just say thank you to people first, since I'm going to be getting off tonight at 9 to go watch the documentary. And so let me get to the thank yous just so that we don't accidentally run out of time. So, Arlene Lima, thank you very much. I appreciate your support. Uh, Claire Marie, always a huge supporter, and your support is very much appreciated. We love you, Claire. Thank you very much. Christy also has a question. So, or a comment. Let's see. Nurse Kim spoke of how we have vasoconstriction in our bodies. So if John was on the lawn since Karen left, he never would have bled when she pulled the glass out. You were right. So yeah, so we're trying to think of all the different possible theories here, but right, I think that's what Nurse Kim would agree with that. She would say um, that if John was out there the whole time and you pulled glass out because of vasoconstriction, he would not have bled. And but again, we don't know if the story is true. We don't know if it's a false memory. There's all kinds of things that it could be. And the dude abides is here. We missed him the last couple of shows. He says, not gonna lie, this week has really left the dude dejected, but I will never stop showing support. So do tell, dude. Hopefully we get time. Let me know what has dejected you. My friend Blanco, thank you very much. He says, thanks for what you do, Kevin, and shout out to JI5 and Thomas Fleming. And just so you know, JI5 stands for Joe, J-O, not J-O-E. JI5 is a woman. She is a lovely woman. And Thomas Fleming is a lovely man, too. I don't want Thomas to be left out. Tolly says, oh, and Tolly, that's an extremely generous contribution and not worthy, but thank you very much. I can't believe Karen's lack of remorse for John and laughing at the witness. Then she admits on camera Turtle is intimidating witnesses. Justice for Officer John O'Keefe. Thank you for sticking for the facts, Kevin. And yeah, we'll get to that. Hopefully I'll get to a lot of that. There was a lot of strange things that came through in the documentary. So that really juxtaposed very even more oddly against Alan Jackson's weird comments yesterday in the trial. So it was really, really interesting. And Caroline Sweet up in Canada with another generous contribution. Thank you, Caroline. I appreciate it. Not necessary at all, but thank you. And Hillbilly Nitro, our really good friend down from Tennessee, I believe. He says, you're doing great work, Kevin, Mr. Prime Time. Yeah, I know. I got about 8 seconds in the documentary, but at least I got to debunk the part about why Brian Albert didn't, and why Brian and Nicole Albert didn't hear what was going on outside. I think I had a pretty good explanation for that. Maybe they'll give me a little. The final episode tonight is an hour at 9 o'clock, and maybe. So my part in it was to debunk the conspiracy theory. So hopefully they'll use a little bit more of me, but it doesn't matter to me if somebody else debunks the point, like Brendan Kane, John Jackson. If they debunk it, that's just as good with me. Even better if you had somebody like one of the news reporters they had on there, Christina Rex. She's done an excellent job. Even better if she debunks it because she's a news reporter. But we'll see. So James Clay, thank you very much. Proctor's text showed no cover-up. The feds cleared everyone except Karen Reed. That is very much true. Not exactly cleared, but they didn't find any evidence despite digging very, very hard. So that is true. Okay. Oh yeah, so let's get to the witness list. I probably should have started at 7. I feel like there's so much to go over. That is not actually it. Where did I have this? Oh, hold on a second. It's always scary here. There's a risk I put up the wrong screen and it has somebody's private information, but I mean, all right. So here is the defense Witness list. Now, keep in mind, these are people they may call. And what we're going to look for is anybody that might be different. So, Brian, Caitlin Albert, Christopher Albert, Colin Albert, Julie Albert, Kevin Albert. So, I think these were all the same. Nobody called on Kevin last time. Nicole Albert, Michael Wagner or Wagner, not sure. There are names that I don't recognize, and that doesn't mean they're not. I didn't even notice this earlier. Paul Makowski. Now, Paul Makowski is the private investigator employed by Karen Reed. That's actually very interesting. Very interesting. He is in many ways right there at the beginning of the conspiracy theory. Now, one of the other true, and you'll see another name on this list like that, but one of the other true originators of the conspiracy theory is Steve Scallan, and he is on the prosecution's list. Now, I do not believe that Steve Scallan, well, when actually David Yannetti came out and said finally in that documentary that Steve Scallan had no information, he just had theories, which is interesting because up until that documentary, all we've seen is David Yannetti trying to present Scallan as though he's a whistleblower that has been scared into silence. All right. So interesting. Officer Nick Barrows from Dighton is not on the prosecution list, but he is on the defense list here. Really interesting. Will they choose to call him? I don't know. Trooper Evan Bent, Trooper Buchanan, Lori Cahill. Let's see. All right. Christopher Curran. Kerry Curran. This is interesting too. Nicholas Curran. Don't know who Nicholas is. But the Currans, there were a couple of Karen friends from Canton. There are people that developed a friendship with Karen and John. Basically, my understanding is by hanging out at the Hillside Pub, someplace I haven't really got to check out yet, but I guess has tremendous food. So very neighborhood kind of place, worth checking out. I do want to check it out at some point. So the Currans were people that for a long time and presumably still do believe that Karen is innocent. Now, to my knowledge, nobody's interviewed him. I've talked to some people that talk about him. Nobody has said anything disparaging. But for what they were people that were close to Karen, so they believe in her innocence. They may have played some role in this conspiracy theory. I don't know. Again, and I'm not trying to disparage them in any way. I don't know enough about them, but I just know they're friends of Karen from Canton that believe that Karen's innocent. Ricky D'Antonio is the driver of the pickup truck that Ryan Nagel was in. Officer Kelly Dever is been a while since I heard this name. She was on their list last time. She was but they didn't use her. She is someone that worked at the Canton Police that I think currently works for the Boston Police. And my understanding last year was that the defense was going to, or believed she was going to testify to something that happened at the Sally Port. But that she had spent a lot of time last spring or sometime preparing with Adam Lally. And she was not at all happy to be called on this. So we don't know exactly what she's going to say if she'll be called. And she wasn't called last time. So she probably won't be. These other names I don't know. Or they're obvious. So actually, it's funny. They have on the Greek couple, is what people call it, the Kolikathas. They were drinking at the waterfall. They did testify in the first trial for the prosecution. Not sure why Adam Lally called up and found out what kind of beers they drink and where they parked and what time they went to Sunday Mass. But the only thing they really testified to is they didn't see anything unusual at the waterfall, and Karen didn't seem drunk to them. So I don't really know why Adam Lally called on him, but now the defense might call on him. I don't really know why I don't really understand why I'm not trying to start a war. There were a lot of things that the prosecution did in the last case that I don't understand. Hey, I'm just a bartender, so that's all right. So Lucky Lawford is on the list again. Heather was Ryan Nagel's ex-girlfriend who was in the truck at the time. Allie McCabe. Now, Allie McCabe testified for the prosecution last time. She is not on the prosecution's list now. And so the Allie McCabe is only a witness to one thing. She arrived at the house at 12:10 to pick up Colin Albert and give him a ride home. She's the kid that's the high school kid on a Friday night, instead of being out at keg parties or instead of being sitting on a couch being a couch potato, like a lot of kids that age, she's going around giving everybody rides all around town. So she's a much nicer kid than I ever was in high school and maybe anybody I knew. But some people are like that. I know, actually, I did know some girls that were like that too, and that were really nice and would do those kind of things. And she also rescued a stray dog that night that was they were worried about because a blizzard was coming in or due to come in. So Matt McCabe, Lance Mell, we don't know who that is. Ryan Nagel was an important witness who's in the pickup truck. And his sister, they arrived at the same time as Karen and John. Julie Nagel, Ryan's sister, was inside the house for a birthday party with Brian Albert Jr., and she and Sarah Levinson decided to stay with the older guests when they got home. Steve Nelson, Andre Porto, Elizabeth Proctor. I mean, she was on the defense list last time too. Are they really going to call Elizabeth Proctor? What does Elizabeth Proctor really have to offer about this? And the only thing you bring in Elizabeth Proctor, especially if the door's been open to talk about it, she can talk about the witness intimidation. She's not a witness, but she suffered that from horrible intimidation by this mindless mob. Michael Proctor is on here in case the prosecution decides not to call on him. Kerry Roberts. This is amazing. Why is Kerry Roberts on the defense witness list when in the first trial, when she testified, she was so effective and her really among the most powerful testimony in the case? I don't see how anybody could watch Kerry Roberts' testimony and still believe there's a conspiracy. Yet the defense chose to not even cross-examine her because she was so powerful. Yet now they have her on the defense list. But, I think it's probably they don't plan to call her. It's to err on the side of caution. You put everybody you think you might call on the list. You don't want to have to put it on later. Lieutenant Brian Tully, again, presumably Courtney Proctor, so Michael's sister. I don't think they want to call her either. I mean, she's in the school where she works, elementary school, when David Yannetti pulls his stunt to have his private investigator, presumably, and Lucky meet in the parking lot in order to try to intimidate the Proctors. I don't know. I don't think the defense wants to put her on the stand. Ashley Bell was on the witness list last year, wasn't called, wasn't happy about being on the witness list, doesn't have anything of evidentiary value except for the fact that she recorded Trooper Buchanan. Well, when I shouldn't say record, her Ring video picked up Trooper Buchanan coming to her house as he was, because she lives, it's somewhere in that area that Karen might have driven by going home. And it was Buchanan looking for Ring video. So her door must be close enough to the street that Buchanan identified that and said, maybe they have some video here, but there was no useful video that she had. All right, here comes to the interesting part of the list. Get ready. Norfolk County District Attorney Michael Morrissey. Now, this is super unlikely to be allowed by the judge, but they're throwing it on there just in case that they can make that argument, in case some evidence can emerge that they can use. Now, these next two are really interesting, Tom Beatty and Aaron Beatty. Now, Tom Beatty is, I wouldn't say he's patient zero for the conspiracy theory, but he might be, but he's certainly close to that. He's close to Karen. He's another one like the Currans who used to drink with Karen and John at the hillside. He has described Karen as being flirtatious with him and that's before John died. And after John died, is, I guess, reached out to Karen and asked her out. But he has stayed in touch with Karen closely as a confidant all through this, believes fervently in her innocence. And Tom also, according to Karen's own words, is the one that informed Karen that Brian Albert owned a German Shepherd. Erin Beatty is Tom has two daughters. Tom is divorced, and he lives with his two daughters. And the oldest is Erin, who was the same high school class as Allie McCabe and Colin Albert. Erin is an athlete, and Tom very protective of his daughters, as he should be. And it doesn't matter why this shit happens in high school. It happens in everybody's life in high school. There's no need to get into the details of why. It doesn't matter. But Erin was in the same social group as a bunch of kids that included Allie McCabe. Something happened, and Erin was no longer in that social group. Whatever the cause is, it doesn't matter, but that is extremely painful to go through. And for a father who loves his daughters as much as Tom does, he's a guy that apparently, I've never met him. He's a guy that wears his heart on his sleeve and was, he's a guy, big guy, 250 pounds, 6'4", I guess. Maybe he likes to fight a little bit, a little bit hot-headed. And he's a guy who's protective of his daughters. He'd go through hell for him. And so we can respect that. But is that part of the fuel here? At the end of the day, Canton is a small town. It's 22,000 people, but when you get to these core people here that grew up in Canton and that have kids in the high school, it's even smaller. It has that real kind of small town feel. And in small towns like that, you have small town feuds. The Hatfields and the McCoys, right? I mean, but especially in a town where everybody drinks, not everybody, but so all of these people, a crucial part of their social life is drinking. Public drinking, going to pubs, going to parties. I'm told that this high school and youth sporting events are big drinking events, not for the kids, but the parents will get together at somebody's house or at a pub before the game and have some drinks, go to the game. Somebody will often have what is called, strangely enough, a Canton bag, which is a bag full of nips. I've seen one of those myself in Dedham last year. And then go meet somewhere afterwards. It's very social. And this was the occasion for the night of John's death. Many of these people there had kids that had played in a basketball game. So again, I'm not knocking it, but when people drink, listen, when people drink like that, good things happen and bad things happen. The good things are, it can be a social bonding fluid, that alcohol, right? It brings people together, can help make life more enjoyable. So I'm not knocking it. But when people drink, after you've had a certain amount of drinks, and not with everybody, but some people, you can have stupid arguments that you wouldn't normally have. Everybody's seen it at their house on Thanksgiving, right? And it's just that happens with alcohol, right? And also old grievances, once you're in that moment where you're fueled by alcohol, can come back to life. It could be something petty, but when you've been drinking, it seems bigger. Maybe it was their turn to buy a round at the bar and they didn't. That sounds stupid, but some stupid thing is what it is. Or it could be some old grievance that goes back to high school, since a lot of these people went to high school. Now, Tom Beatty is he's an insider, kind of an outsider. He's been there long enough and his kids go to school there and he drinks in the pubs and everybody knows him. But unlike the other people, he is not originally from Canton. He's from the nearby town of Dorchester, which is really like the other side of the tracks when it comes to Canton. So he may have been looked at to some degree as an outsider. Maybe, or maybe it may even just have felt that way, even if nobody looked at him that way. But when you're an outsider, you may feel like that. You may be acutely sensitive about it. So I'm putting together the ingredients for the soup, but I don't know exactly how it was cut up and which went in there. But there seemed to be some friction that has nothing to do with Karen Reed or John O'Keefe. And now, why is Erin included here? Well, the only reason that I could know of is that Colin Albert called Erin at 12:31 that night. And this has been known for a long time because Tom Beatty told this to Turtle Boy going back to like the summer of 2023. So Turtle Boy speculated that, trying to come up with that. Turtle Boy's speculation was that Colin was at the crime scene. He didn't get in the car with Allie and go with her. He killed John, so he needed a ride home, and he called Erin. But Erin didn't have her driver's license. So there was never a chance that Erin was going to give Colin a ride home. So that theory doesn't make sense. Why did Colin call Erin at 12:31? Nobody knows. And it's really not relevant. Erin was asleep and didn't see the call until the next day. So is it relevant? They're going to try to make it relevant, right? They're going to try to say that that this call was an indication of something strange. Keep in mind that John's phone last moved at 12:32 and 16 seconds. So is the defense going to try to tie this in here? They're going to try to, again, paint a picture at Colin. It's a long shot. I think the other way to look at this is that they probably have no intention of calling Tom or Erin onto the stand, but that they might want to make the prosecution waste resources. In some ways, it seems like the prosecution has less resources than the defense here in terms of lawyers and private investigators and stuff like that. I don't know. Maybe that's not a totally fair statement, but the defense has a pretty exhaustive list of resources and lawyers now. So are they just trying to throw some of these people up there to make the prosecution waste resources going on wild goose chases? Maybe. Who knows? John O'Keefe Sr. is on the list. Now, he was on the list last time, too. Remember all the false rumors that they were putting out about John saying that he flipped and he was going to be sitting. He had informed the court office. This whole case, this is one of the things that baffles me, is that this whole case has consisted of people putting out falsehoods all the time. And it's like Charlie Brown and Lucy with the football. They never learn anything. Nobody ever says, oh, okay. I mean, I remember Nick telling us that Allie McCabe's, she had released her text messages or copies of her text messages between her and Colin Albert. And Nick on Court TV was saying these are fake because there's a semicolon in there and there's no semicolon inside text messages. But I got off the air and I looked at my phone and I had it in mind. So, but it's on and on this goes. These things never. Nobody ever learns. Nobody ever says these people that are reporting things that are untrue. And they never say, so then the next time they report something, they never look at it and say, all right, maybe I should be more skeptical this time. So we were told by multiple people. I had Sean telling me this, or Sean was reporting this. I don't remember if I think he was reporting this publicly, that John O'Keefe Sr. had flipped and had told the court officers that he was going to sit with the Reed family. And of course, that turned out to be false. Came in and he sat with the O'Keefe family as always. But nobody ever learns anything. All right. Chief Rafferty is on the list. She's also on the prosecution list. I don't know what she has to offer here. Interesting. So at the time, I think she might have been acting chief or something like that because Chief Berkowitz was out on injury or sick leave or something. Irini Scortibello is the medical examiner. And this is interesting to me too, because why wouldn't it seems to me it's automatic that the state is going to be calling Scortibello, but maybe they're not. She did a bad. I I was not impressed by her in the first case, and she almost seemed hostile to the defense. I mean, I'm sorry, to the prosecution. So, but nonetheless, she is the medical examiner, so the prosecution is going to call her up, and she certainly didn't testify in any way that John wasn't struck by a vehicle. She just, I don't know, just wasn't very good and wasn't very effective. Just, I don't know. But there's no way the prosecution is not going to call her, because if you don't call her, that's probably why you put this here. Let's say the prosecution has chosen to get a more articulate medical examiner that didn't do the autopsy, but still looked at the autopsy results and comes in and gives a better explanation to the jury. Well, then the defense might respond to that by calling in Scortibella. And even if she doesn't support the defense's case, it still could create an impression on a jury, because the jury would say, if she's the medical examiner, why didn't the prosecution call her? So anyways, it's just a lot of gamesmanship that goes on in this stuff too. Chris Van E, PhD. Sorry, I couldn't help that. Chris Van E is an incredibly qualified accident reconstructionist. I have no idea what his report is, but incredibly qualified, as is Daniel Wolf. We heard Brennan talking about him the other day, neurosurgeon for like 30 years or something. Of course, we got Richard Green. We have Andrew Rentschler. And I'm skipping over the names if they don't mean anything to me. And Dr. Russell and Garrett Wing. I thought Wing was on the prosecution list. I don't know. I must be confused on that. So, anyways. All right. So that's it for the defense list. All right. So we got about 20 minutes left before the documentary. So I don't know what you guys think about the documentary so far. I think I look at it from different points of view in terms of, did it create a fair impression? Did it capture any interesting drama? Did it give us any new information? But from the production standpoint, did they do a good job? Did they give something that created an interesting historical record for this? And I think they have done that. It can be a little frustrating at times, because some of the things that are said in there by either the attorneys or by Karen or by Sue O'Connell need to be debunked or corrected. And they were things that I did debunk when I spoke to them. Hopefully, they will debunk some of these things tonight, either by showing me or somebody else like John Jackson or Brendan Kane or Joe Krowski debunk them. For instance, when Sue O'Connell says that, and keep in mind, we don't know when that was recorded with Sue O'Connell. She may have changed her mind since then. Sue O'Connell's gone through definitely a significant evolution in her thinking. Early in the case, early in the trial, she seemed to become kind of friends with Turtle Boy from him being in court with her. And she seemed to be pretty strongly free Karen Reed, but by the end of the trial, seems to have, I don't want to say flipped, but certainly seems very skeptical of the conspiracy theory. And she's done some good analysis, but I don't know when that was recorded. So she said in there, when the documentary was recorded. So what she said was in there was that there was a small window in which to plant evidence. And they look at the timeline in a very superficial kind of way. So the documentary shows how it left, the tow truck left Dr. Dighton at 4:18, and that it arrived just after 5:30. And Karen points out that the CERT team arrived at 5, and they were looking for 45 minutes and didn't find anything. And then lo and behold, 8 or 9 minutes after the Lexus arrived at the Sally Port, they suddenly started finding pieces of evidence of taillight. So if you look at that, now none of that is a lie, right? That's technically true. And this is the problem with giving people half a story. If you look at that, and this is what Karen Reed and her lawyers do brilliantly. I don't want to say brilliant because it's not that hard to do, but they give people half stories all the time. So there's a half story, and Karen's there like, well, I don't know, nobody could find, the whole team is looking there, and no one could find anything for 45 minutes. And then, wow, all of a sudden, 9 minutes after the Lexus arrives, they start finding pieces, which seems to give it just enough time, right? If you look at it from that superficial way, just enough time for someone to pry taillight pieces and then race to the crime scene. The problem is when you look at the actual evidence of what that was going on at that crime scene. So Lieutenant O'Hara, of the head of the CERT team, testified that he arrived at 3 minutes to 5. And that was verified by his phone or by the ID system in his car, in his squad car, or whatever car. I shouldn't say squad car, the car that he was assigned. We learned that recently in one of the prosecution documents, or maybe it was in Hank talking about it at the hearing. So there's no question. Trooper O'Hara arrived at 3 minutes to 5. He testified that there was one member of the 7-man CERT team that was coming that day. There was one person that was already there, and there was, I don't remember if Lieutenant Tully was there at that point. He probably was, but I'm not sure. And the rest of the team filtered in because the CERT team, the Special Emergency Response Team, is not based on one particular police barracks or assigned to a county. So it's coming from all over the state during a blizzard. So one of the members there's 8 men, I think, on the team, and one wasn't able to get there. 7 said they could make it, and they had to really wait till they get there. The last person of the team didn't arrive. Was it 5:41 or 5:38? I forget exactly what it was. So that's really when they started digging in earnest and shoveling. It's not like Lieutenant O'Hara jumped out of the car at 3 minutes of 5 and ran over to the crime scene and started shoveling. That's not how it works. I'm not part of the CERT team, but just let's use some common sense here. They're taught to go into an area and methodically look for evidence in harsh weather conditions. That's why they were called in. And so they've got to, if it's night, they've got to set up lighting. So that's part of their job, right? They got to set up lighting so they can search that area. They've got to mark it off in some kind of way so they know what the area is to search. Lieutenant Tully is the one that gave them information where to search, basically from the flagpole to the street and X amount of feet towards the driveway, knowing based on where John was found, based on reports that he had. And so you can look, they did not dig past the flagpole. They did not shovel past the flagpole, which is maybe 4, 5, 6 feet from the street. And the length of the area that they shoveled was at the most 2 parking spaces. So these guys basically shoveled out an area that was the size of 2 parking spaces. And so that's 7 people working within that small area. They described it in trial as, quote, working almost shoulder to shoulder. So that work began around 5:40, not at 5 o'clock, like Karen tried to say in the documentary. And the Lexus was moved into the Sally Port at 5:36. The Sally Port door closed at 5:42. It's a 5-minute drive from the crime scene. You've seen the NBC footage of the crime scene. You wouldn't have been able to drive down that street. It was packed with police vehicles and other types of vehicles. So each one of the members of the CERT team had to bring their own vehicle. Lieutenant Tully was there, and there were other people from the city there. So the scene was crowded with vehicles, many of them with their police lights on. And the idea of somebody from the Sallyport racing there, somehow getting out of their car, being unnoticed, walking by all these cops into the middle of a crime scene where 7 police officers are now already shoveling almost shoulder to shoulder. The idea that this person is going to go in there and bury that taillight piece 3 feet down, because it was described vividly. O'Hara said they went through 3 feet of snow. Because why 3 feet? Because there was 22 inches of snow that day. The reason is because they described that as they were digging down, they got to the older plowed snowbank, and it was a little bit harder. But if you're from New England, you understand how it works. The plowed snow, you want to get a different shovel for it, or you'll use a plastic shovel, you're going to break it. The plowed snow is heavier. So you had the 22 inches of snow or 20 inches of snow, whatever, that fell on top of the plowed snowbank made by Lucky at 5:30. That's where they found the taillight piece. The taillight pieces, there were several found at that time, and John's shoe. And they knew the shoe was missing, so they weren't going to leave until they found the shoe. So the idea that somebody raced from the Sallyport into the middle of that scene and buried all that stuff 3 feet down into a snowbank, come on. There was no window. So I have no idea if Sue O'Connell has ever heard of my channel or watches. Probably not. If anybody knows Sue, just let her know. Now, she probably knows this now. Like I said, this was recorded a long time ago. And I know a lot of people's positions have evolved in this. At one point, Joe said in the show, Joe Krowski did brilliant in the show. But at one point, he said that the investigation was really sloppy. I don't know if he would say that now. So this is, I'm on Court TV all the time with Joe, and I've seen his positions evolve on some things since last spring, because he too got to go through the trial and see the evidence, but also hearing us talk about it and things like that. So maybe he would still say that. I don't know. But I had the feeling he might not say that. I think that was something that that's similar to the kind of things that he kind of felt back in March. But again, he was brilliant on the show. And actually, I thought Christina Rex was brilliant. I thought Ted Daniel did a good job too. I mean, people don't want to hear that, but I think he did. And there was this little guy from the Boston Herald. I forget his name. He did a good job too. Did a very good job. And Jen Coffindaffer does a good job. And who else was on there? But anyways, those things I hope they get to correct tonight a little bit, at least to some degree, because it's tough to let those things hang out there. It's tough for me when you know they're not true, Heisenberg says, Kevin, it's going to get worse for her. In the interview, she confirmed that her car senses was working when she arrived at John's house. So, I can pull that up. Actually, our friend Pat sent me the video on that. So let me pull it up, and welcome Laxi Daisical. Very clever. Let me pull up this. This is Karen's words. So here we go.
Because at 12:41, I leave a voicemail to John where you can clearly hear me pull into John's garage. You can hear my car sensors beeping as I come close to the sides of the garage door. Beep, 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 beep. And then you hear the car go off, and then you hear the...
Okay, so thank you very much for sending that to me, Pat. So we've always known this because she leaked this to Turtle Boy back in the summer of 2023, that there was a voicemail where she calls John, and she doesn't leave a message, but his voicemail picks up the boots on the ground, the alarms of the car, and the garage door closing. That comes at 12:41. And so what Heisenberg is pointing out is that this proves that the sensors and the alarms were working. So when she put it in reverse and struck John clip John on the arm, enough to slow the speed of the vehicle down by 0.6 miles per hour and enough to jolt the steering wheel from minus 4.5 to plus 4.5 degrees. That's a significant enough shift. You would feel that, when you're driving it. But her alarms would have been going off. But I don't think anybody's really questioned that the alarms would have been going off, and they probably did pick up John, although it's hard to say. Sensors picking up a human that's not directly behind it. But I think the alarms in most cars, and certainly a very sophisticated car by the Lexus, would have picked that up. The question is whether Karen, again in the documentary, she tries to say I was blasting music. She's always, you notice how she's always saying I'm blasting music because I'm always blasting music. And that day I was blasting YouTube on YouTube or something like whatever she says. Because if at the end of the day a juror is able to accept that Karen that her Lexus did that, she wants to be able to at least retreat to the position that she didn't know it. But it's hard to do that if she heard the alarm. So I actually have had no problem, aside from that, weirdly, aside from Karen's statements, I haven't had much of a problem thinking that she didn't hear it or didn't register it in her mind. Because one, she's in a rage. And B, just kidding. Two, she's wasted. So she's raging and she's wasted. And in that frame of mind, you might not hear the alarms. That's not inconceivable to me that you block, because you're talking about a 4-5 second period. You might have blocked that out if you're in such a rage. But I'm a little bit less inclined to believe that because of Karen's statements. The way that she's constantly emphasizing how, the music was blasting. The music was blasting because I'm always blasting the music. She's always saying that. Why does she want to emphasize that? Why does she want to tell everybody that the music was blasting? Again, this person isn't an idiot. So when she tells you something, it's for a reason. You got to remember that. It's for a reason. So why is she always telling us that the music was blasted? Well, I don't know. I can tell you 2 + 2 and you can do the math. All right. Artworks. Thank you very much. In the documentary, I was astounded with Karen's statement that either Jen or she would go down. Was Karen jealous of Jen? So it was actually even more powerful than that, right? She said, she basically looked at the camera and you know what? I have the quote here somewhere. Hold on, let me look for it. She looked at the camera, addressing Jen McCabe, eye to eye, and said, either I'm going down or you are. So that's even more, that's weirdly personal. Like she's putting that into a documentary knowing that Jen McCabe might watch it later. That's weird shit. Thank you for bringing that up, Artworks. That was pretty important. So I appreciate it. Got about 2 minutes left here. There was a whole bunch of other stuff that I wanted to get into and just ran out of time. So the book should still, hopefully, I'll be able to send you soon a link to the pre-order for the book, which is Storm of Suspicion. And, I titled this particular video Vile because it's just stunning to me that Alan Jackson, with Aidan Kearney sitting right behind him in camera view, right where the judge can see Aidan Kearney. And the judge certainly knows everything about this, right? Alan Jackson doesn't say Turtle Boy, but he describes the actions that were Turtle Boy as vile. The vile actions of witness intimidation that took place by this mindless mob. He described them multiple times as vile. But he said, that has nothing to do with me or my client. That has nothing to do with us or our client. It's just stunning that he does this right when Turtle Boy is behind him. Turtle Boy, who is a key speaker at their fundraiser a couple months ago. You can't distance yourself from him, Alan Jackson. Turtle Boy, who is very close to them. Turtle Boy, Alan Jackson and David Andy were in close contact with in the early months of that Also, remember, July 29th or July 30th, I got a call from Aiden Kearney, July of 2023, saying Alan Jackson wants to talk to me. And he gave me Alan Jackson's his number. So I texted Alan Jackson. But so Alan Jackson was still in touch with Aiden all the way. They want to make it seem like we only were in touch with him for a couple of weeks. No, they were still in touch with him at least all through that summer. But in addition, look at this documentary. And let's finish with this. They show Karen looking at a video of Allie McCabe, 19-year-old college girl, squeaky clean, breaking down on the stand because of the incredible intimidation that has been unleashed by that mindless, vicious, vile mob. And what is Karen's reaction to that? She looked at it and said, I don't feel anything for these people because they're not witnesses. They are or should have been suspects. So on the same day that Alan Jackson called that activity vile, we saw Karen in the documentary support that activity. She supported it. Now, granted, that was recorded months earlier, but she basically said, screw them. I support it. They deserve it because they're suspects. What else do you need to know about this case? What else do you really need to know? All right, so I have to go watch the documentary, and hopefully we'll be happy tonight. And tomorrow morning we'll have the hearing. So hopefully there is a hearing. It's up to Hank Brennan's health. And so thank you all for being here. Thank you for the contributions, and we got a lot more to go over. We'll get to it either tomorrow or Friday.